Jiho sat in the back of the lecture hall, trying to make himself as small as possible. It wasn't working. Every few minutes, another student would turn around to stare at him. Some whispered to their neighbors. Others just looked afraid. He was used to it by now. 3 weeks into his first semester at Galactic Consortium University, and he was still the weird one, the dangerous one, the Deathworlder. The lecture hall was beautiful, he had to admit. The walls were made of something that looked like crystal but felt warm to the touch. Soft blue light came from everywhere and nowhere at once. The seats adjusted automatically to fit each student's body shape. There were 42 students in the class representing 19 different species. And then there was Jiho, the only human. Professor Thalvin floated into the room. He was a Valurian, which meant he looked like a jellyfish that someone had stretched out and given too many tentacles. His skin changed colors when he talked, flashing between blues and purples. Jiho had learned that blue meant calm and purple meant excited. "Good morning, students," Professor Thalvin said. His voice came from a translator device that hung in the air near him. "Today we will discuss something special, something that has puzzled our greatest minds for 1,000 years. The room went quiet. Even the chlorophytes, who usually rustled their leaves constantly, went still. Professor Thalvin's skin flashed bright purple. The null point paradox, Jiho had heard of it. Everyone had. It was one of those famous unsolved problems that scientists talked about at parties. The kind of thing that made people shake their heads and say, well, some things we'll just never understand. "Can anyone tell me what the null point paradox is?" the professor asked. A student in the front row raised 3 of her arms. She was a quill wren, insect-like with delicate wings. "It's the mathematical contradiction in faster-than-light travel," she said in a voice like wind chimes. "The equations say FTL drives should destroy ships at the quantum level. But they work perfectly. No one knows why." "Correct," Professor Thalvin said. His skin flashed blue with approval. "For 1,000 years we have used FTL drives. They work beautifully. But the mathematics say they cannot work. We call this the null point, the place where theory and reality separate." He waved a tentacle and a massive equation appeared in the air above the students. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Numbers and symbols flowed across the space like a river. "The greatest minds in the galaxy have studied this problem," the professor continued. "The Prism Collective spent 200 years on it. The Hive Queens dedicated 3 generations of their best thinkers. All failed. We have accepted that some mysteries are beyond us." Jiho frowned. He pulled out his data pad and started looking at the equation more closely. Around him, other students were taking notes, nodding along with the professor's words. They seemed content to accept that the problem was unsolvable. But something bothered Jiho about that. Back on Earth, when something didn't make sense, people didn't just give up. They kept poking at it until they found the answer. Sometimes the answer was simple. Sometimes it was hiding in plain sight. He started sketching on his datapad, breaking the big equation down into smaller pieces. There was something odd about the assumptions built into it, something that felt wrong. "The null point paradox reminds us that the universe has secrets," Professor Thalvin was saying. "It teaches us humility. We may be advanced civilizations, but we do not know everything." Jiho raised his hand. The room went silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. Several students moved their seats slightly away from him. Professor Thalvin's skin flickered between colors. Jiho had learned this meant the professor was nervous. "Yes, Jiho? What if the math is correct but the assumptions are wrong?" Jiho asked. The professor's skin went completely pale. "I don't understand your question." "Well," Jiho said, feeling suddenly self-conscious. Everyone was staring at him now. "The equation assumes that space-time will resist FTL travel, right? That it will fight against the ship moving faster than light. What if that assumption is wrong? What if space-time doesn't resist? What if it does something else?" Professor Thalvin was silent for a long moment. His tentacles had stopped moving, which Jiho had learned meant he was thinking hard. That's not possible," the professor finally said. "Space-time must resist. All our understanding of physics requires it." "But what if our understanding is incomplete?" Jiho pressed. He knew he should probably shut up, but the problem was interesting now. On Earth we have this saying, if you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. It means look for the simple answer first. What if the simple answer here is that our basic assumption is wrong? The Quilren student in the front row made a sound like breaking glass. Jiho thought that might be her species' way of gasping. Young human, Professor Thalvin said slowly. Are you suggesting that 1,000 years of galactic science has been based on a faulty assumption? Jiho hesitated. When the professor put it that way, it sounded pretty arrogant. I'm just asking questions, he said quietly. Professor Thalvin floated closer to Jiho's desk. What are you working on your datapad? Just some sketches. I was trying to see what happens if you flip the resistance assumption. If instead of spacetime pushing back against FTL, it, I don't know, accommodates it somehow. Show me. Jiho handed over his datapad. He had drawn several rough diagrams showing how the math might work differently if spacetime was flexible rather than rigid. It wasn't complete. It probably wasn't even correct. But it was a different way of looking at the problem. Professor Thalvin's skin cycled through colors Jiho had never seen before. Pale green, dark orange, almost black. Class dismissed, the professor said suddenly. But we have 40 minutes left, the Quilran student said. Class. Dismissed. Professor Thalvin's voice was shaking. He was still staring at Jiho's datapad. Everyone leave now except you, Jiho. You stay. The other students gathered their things and hurried out. Jiho heard them whispering as they left. He caught fragments of conversation. Typical Deathworlder. Can't just accept what he's told. Dangerous thinking. When the room was empty, Professor Thalvin finally looked up from the datapad. His skin was bright purple now, almost glowing. Do you understand what you've done? The professor asked. Jiho shook his head. You've seen something. Something that might be significant. Something that no one else has seen in 1,000 years. The professor's tentacles were shaking. I need to call an emergency meeting of the physics faculty. Right now, this might be nothing. It might be a student's foolish error. But if it's not, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Jiho sat alone in the empty lecture hall and wondered if he had just made a terrible mistake. He pulled out his personal communicator and saw a message from his sister Hyun back on Earth. She had been watching his lecture remotely. What did you just do? The message said. The whole class feed just got cut. Are you in trouble? Jiho typed back, I don't know. I think I might have accidentally solved an impossible problem. He hit send and waited. Outside the lecture hall, he could hear running footsteps and raised voices. Word was already spreading through the university. The Deathworlder had done something. Something that was making the professors panic. Jiho had never been inside the faculty conference room before. It was intimidating. The ceiling stretched up so high he couldn't see the top. The walls were covered in screens showing equations and star charts. 16 professors sat around a table that seemed to be made of liquid light, and they were all staring at him. Professor Thalvin had brought 7 members of the physics faculty. Word had spread fast, and now the mathematics department was here too. Even Chancellor Vormis had arrived, looking annoyed at being pulled from whatever important meeting he had been attending. Explain it again, said Dr. Quenthar. She was an avian, tall and covered in silver feathers. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent. Slowly this time. Use small words. Jiho took a deep breath. His hands were sweating. The null point paradox exists because everyone assumes spacetime resists FTL travel. But what if it doesn't? What if spacetime is more flexible than we think? That's not an explanation, Dr. Quenthar said coldly. That's wild speculation. Let him continue, Professor Thalvin said quietly. Jiho pulled up his sketches on the room's main display. Look at the original equations. They're built on the idea that spacetime is rigid. That it has rules that can't be bent. But what if spacetime is more like a living thing? What if it adapts? Several professors made sounds of discomfort. Chancellor Vormis's face, which looked vaguely reptilian, went pale. You're suggesting the universe is alive? Dr. Quenthar said. That's not science. That's philosophy. Or religion. No, not alive exactly, Jiho said. He knew he was explaining this badly. But he didn't have the vocabulary these professors had. He was just a first-year student. I mean, what if the universe has built-in mechanisms to prevent catastrophic failure? Like error correction, like redundancy systems. Professor Milkasa spoke for the first time. She was a member of the Prism Collective, her body made of living crystal. When she talked, her voice sounded like music. Give us an example from your world, Jiho thought for a moment. Okay. When I was 16, I was in a car accident. A bad one. The physics said I should have died. The force of impact should have broken every bone in my body. But humans have shock response, adrenaline. Our bodies do things in emergencies that they can't normally do. We survive things we shouldn't survive. That's biological adaptation, Dr. Quenthar said dismissively. Not physics. But what if physics works the same way? Jiho pressed on. What if the universe has shock responses? What if when we use FTL drives, space-time doesn't break because it has ways to improvise? To survive the stress? The room went completely silent. Professor Thalvin's skin was cycling through colors rapidly. That's a Deathworlder perspective. What does that mean? Jiho asked. It means you come from a world where survival is paramount, Professor Milkasa said gently. Her crystal body was glowing softly. You expect systems to have backup plans, fail-safes, ways to endure damage. Most of us come from peaceful worlds. Stable worlds. We think in terms of equilibrium and harmony. We expect the universe to follow neat, predictable rules. But the universe isn't neat, Jiho said. Earth isn't neat. Things break and adapt and survive in messy ways. Chancellor Vormis stood up abruptly. This is concerning. Concerning how? Professor Thalvin asked. If this human is correct, it means our entire understanding of space-time physics is incomplete. Do you understand what that means politically? Economically? Academically. The Prism Collective has built their entire civilization's reputation on their understanding of quantum mechanics. The Hive Queens have staked their claim to scientific superiority on their theoretical physics. So we should ignore a potential breakthrough because it's inconvenient? Professor Talvin's skin flashed dark red. Jiho hadn't seen that color before, but he suspected it meant anger. I'm saying we need to be careful, Chancellor Vormis said. Very careful. Dr. Quenthar stood up and walked to the display showing Jiho's sketches. She studied them for a long time, her head tilting in a very bird-like way. The mathematics are crude, she said finally. Jiho felt his face get hot. I know, I'm just a student. I don't have the training you all have. Crude, Dr. Quenthar continued, but not wrong. You're using brute force approximation, testing thousands of variations instead of seeking elegant proofs. It's very human. Is that bad? Jiho asked. It's unsophisticated, she said. It's like using a hammer when you need a scalpel, but... She paused. But sometimes a hammer works. Professor Milkasa stood and approached the display as well. Her crystalline fingers touched the equations gently. He's found something. I don't know if it's the answer, but it's a new path. One we never considered because we never thought to question the basic assumption. We should contact Earth, Professor Thalvin said. Get their mathematicians to verify this approach. Chancellor Vormis looked alarmed. If we do that, word will get out. The Galactic Science Council will demand answers. This could become a political incident. It's already going to become a political incident, Professor Milkasa said. 42 students were in that lecture hall. They all saw the human raise questions about the paradox. They saw you dismiss class early. By now, half the campus knows something unusual is happening. As if on cue, an alert appeared on the room's displays. A news notification from the Galactic Academic Network. Breaking. Human student at GCU questions. Null point paradox. Faculty meeting called. Chancellor Vormis made a sound like a deflating balloon. It's already started. Jiho felt sick. He hadn't meant to cause trouble. He'd just asked a question. That was what students were supposed to do, wasn't it? Professor Thalvin placed a gentle tentacle on Jiho's shoulder. Don't blame yourself, young one. You did nothing wrong. You saw something others missed. That's what good scientists do. But everyone's going to be upset, Jiho said quietly. Yes, Professor Thalvin agreed. They are. Change is always uncomfortable, especially change that comes from unexpected sources. Dr. Quenthar was still studying the equations. We need to develop this further. Test it properly. Run simulations. If the mathematics hold up, we'll need to publish. And if they don't hold up? Chancellor Vormis asked hopefully. Then we'll have learned something anyway, Professor Milkasa said. But I don't think they'll fail. There's something here, something real. A message appeared on Jiho's personal communicator. It was from Hyun. You're all over the news feeds. What's happening? Mom and Dad are freaking out. Jiho typed back quickly. Tell them I'm okay. I just asked a question in class. It got bigger than I expected. Another message came in, this time from someone he didn't know. A human named Minho Park. with credentials showing he was a mathematician at Seoul National University back on Earth. Saw the news. Need to talk to you about your approach to the paradox. Can I get access to your preliminary work? This is important. The messages kept coming. Other students asking what happened. News services requesting interviews. A few hate messages from people calling him a Deathworlder troublemaker. Professor Thalvin noticed Jiho's distress. Turn off your communicator for now. We'll handle the external pressure. You focus on the mathematics. I don't even know if I'm right, Jiho said. Maybe this is all wrong. Maybe I'm just embarrassing myself and Earth. Maybe, Professor Milkasa said, but maybe not. Either way, you've reminded us that we should never stop questioning, never stop looking for new angles. That's worth something, even if your solution doesn't work. Chancellor Vormus was reading something on his own display. His expression grew more worried. The Galactic Science Council has been notified. They're requesting a full report within 3 standard days. 3 days isn't enough time to verify this properly, Dr. Quenthar protested. Nevertheless, that's what they want. Chancellor Vormus looked at Jiho with an expression that might have been sympathy or might have been annoyance. Young human, you've created quite a situation. I hope you understand the implications of what you've started. Jiho didn't understand. Not really. He was just a student from Earth who had asked a question. But looking at the worried faces around the table, seeing the news alerts multiplying on the displays, he began to realize that he might have accidentally done something much bigger than he'd intended. Outside the conference room, he could hear voices. Loud voices. It sounded like a crowd was gathering. Professor Thalvin's skin flashed dark blue. Worry. We should get you somewhere safe, he said to Jiho. At least, until the initial excitement dies down. But Jiho had a feeling that the excitement wasn't going to die down anytime soon. The university campus looked different now. Security barriers had been set up around the physics building. Students gathered in groups talking in hushed voices. News drones hovered overhead, trying to get footage. Jiho watched it all from the window of a small office that Professor Thalvin had arranged for him. It had been 2 days since his question in class. 2 days that felt like 2 years. His communicator buzzed constantly despite being set to filter messages. The news feeds were calling him everything from the human genius who might revolutionize physics to a dangerous Deathworlder, disrupting galactic science. There seemed to be no middle ground. A knock on the door made him jump. It's me, a familiar voice called. Daeon. Jiho opened the door. Daeon was a chlorophyte, which meant she looked like a walking tree covered in leaves that changed color with her mood. Right now, her leaves were a worried yellow-green. Are you okay? She asked, slipping inside quickly. Everyone's talking about you. Half the students think you're amazing. The other half think you're dangerous. What do you think? Jiho asked. Daeon's leaves shifted to a warm pink. I think you asked a good question. That's what we're supposed to do here, isn't it? Question things? Apparently not when it makes everyone uncomfortable. Daeon settled into a chair, her roots extending slightly to anchor her. Professor Ventalis called for your expulsion this morning, in front of his entire advanced mathematics class. Jiho's stomach dropped. Seriously? He said you're destabilizing centuries of established science. That Deathworlders don't understand academic protocol. That Earth should never have been allowed to send students here. Daeon's leaves darkened to angry red. It was horrible. But then Professor Milkasa walked into his classroom and challenged him to a formal academic debate. The whole thing was very dramatic. What happened? Professor Ventalis backed down. But there's a petition now. 300 faculty members have signed it. They want the university to conduct a formal inquiry into whether your presence here is appropriate. Jiho sat down heavily. This is insane. I just asked a question. A question that might overturn 1,000 years of accepted scientific theory, Daeon pointed out. That's kind of a big deal. There was another knock. This time it was Professor Thalvin, accompanied by a human woman Jiho had never met. She was tall, wearing formal diplomatic clothes, and looked very tired. Jiho, this is Ambassador Sora Lee, Professor Thalvin said. She's the human representative to the Galactic Consortium. She's here to help. Ambassador Lee shook Jiho's hand firmly. I've been following this situation closely. Earth's government wants you to know you have our full support. Am I in trouble with Earth too? Jiho asked weakly. No, quite the opposite. The scientific community back home is excited. Dr. Minho Park and his team have been working around the clock on your preliminary equations. They think you're onto something real. But half the galaxy thinks I'm a troublemaker. More than half, actually, Ambassador Lee said with a tired smile. She pulled up a holographic display showing a map of the galaxy. Several regions were highlighted in red. These species have formally protested your enrollment at GCU. They claim allowing humans into advanced academic programs is premature, that we're too unstable, too aggressive, too unpredictable. I'm not aggressive, Jiho protested. I'm just a student. I know that. Earth knows that, but fear isn't rational. Ambassador Lee sat down across from him. Here's the situation. The Galactic Science Council is meeting tomorrow. They're going to discuss the null point paradox and your proposed solution. Whatever they decide will affect Earth's relationship with the rest of the galaxy. That's not fair. I didn't ask for any of this. No, you didn't. But life rarely is fair, especially in politics. Ambassador Lee's expression softened. Look, I know this is overwhelming. You're what, 19 Earth years old? 20? 20? You should be worried about exams and making friends, not galactic politics. But this is where we are, and I need you to be strong. Professor Thalvin's skin flashed supportive blue. The council will want to hear from you directly. You'll need to present your work. I can't present to the Galactic Science Council. I'm just a first-year student. I don't even understand half of what I discovered. Then we'll help you prepare, Professor Milkasa said, entering the office. Her crystal body was glowing brighter than usual. Dr. Quenthar and I have been developing your initial equations. The mathematics are sound. Crude, as I said, but sound. Is that good? Jiho asked. It's terrifying, Dr. Quenthar said, following Professor Milkasa into the now crowded office. Because it means you're right. Space-time does have adaptive properties. It does accommodate FTL travel rather than resist it. We've been wrong for 1,000 years. Jiho's communicator buzzed with an urgent alert. Everyone's devices went off at the same time. A news bulletin flashed across all their screens. Breaking assassination attempt at Galactic Consortium University. Target believed to be human student. The blood drained from Jiho's face. Someone tried to kill me? The attempt was intercepted, Ambassador Lee said, already on her feet and talking rapidly into her own communicator. Security stopped the assailant before they reached this building. But Jiho, this changes things. We need to move you to a secure location immediately. Who would want to kill a student? Daeun asked, her leaves turning pale with shock. Someone who's afraid of what he represents, Professor Thalvin said quietly. His skin had gone almost black. Someone who fears change more than they value truth. More security personnel entered the office. They were a mix of species, all armed with weapons Jiho hoped he'd never see used. They formed a protective circle around him. We're taking you to the diplomatic quarter, one of them said. Ambassador Lee's residence. It's the most secure location on campus. What about my classes? Jiho asked, which seemed like a stupid question given someone had just tried to kill him, but his brain wasn't working properly. Classes are suspended for all human students, Ambassador Lee said. As a precaution, the other 3 humans at GCU are also being moved to secure locations. They hustled Jiho out of the office through a back corridor he'd never seen before. Through a window, he glimpsed a crowd of protesters near the main entrance. They carried signs in dozens of languages. Some supported him. Others demanded Earth students be expelled. A few called for the university to be shut down entirely. This was insane. This was absolutely insane. At Ambassador Lee's residence, security was tight. Armed guards at every entrance. Energy barriers shimmering in the air. Jiho was taken to a room that looked comfortable, but was clearly designed to be a safe room in emergencies. His sister Hyun called within minutes of his arrival. Her face on the screen looked worried. Are you okay? The news is saying someone tried to hurt you. I'm fine. Security stopped them. Hyun, I'm scared. I know. Mom and Dad want you to come home. They think you should leave GCU. Jiho was tempted. So tempted. To just go back to Earth, back to normal life, back to being nobody important. But then he thought about the null point paradox. About the equations he'd sketched. About the fact that he just might have found something real and important. I can't leave now, he said. Not until I finish this. Hyun smiled, though her eyes were still worried. That's what I told them you'd say. Just be careful, okay? After she disconnected, Jiho sat in the too quiet room and tried to process everything that had happened. 2 days ago, he was just a student. Now he was in protective custody, at the center of a galactic controversy, scheduled to present to the Science Council. Professor Talvin visited that evening, bringing datapads full of equations and research. "If you're going to address the council, you need to be prepared," the professor said. "They won't be gentle. They'll challenge every aspect of your work. What if I can't answer their questions? Then you say you don't know. There's no shame in admitting the limits of your knowledge, but I suspect you'll surprise yourself. You see things differently than we do. That's your strength." They worked late into the night, refining the mathematics, preparing explanations, anticipating questions. Professor Milkasa joined them, and later Dr. Quenthar, who seemed to have warmed slightly to Jiho despite her initial coldness. Around midnight, Ambassador Lee came in with news. They caught the assassin. It was a junior faculty member from the engineering department. Someone named Kelvarn. "Why?" Jiho asked. "He claims he was protecting the Galactic Order, that humans ascending in academic circles would destabilize everything, that it was better to stop you now before Earth gained too much influence." Jiho felt sick. Someone had actually wanted him dead, not because of anything he'd done wrong, but because of what he represented. The fear of change, the fear of humans. "The Science Council vote is tomorrow," Ambassador Lee said. "They'll decide whether to accept your solution and publish it galaxy-wide or suppress it for further review." "Suppress it?" Jiho asked. "They can do that?" "They can do whatever they vote to do, and right now the vote is very close. It could go either way." Jiho looked at the equations floating in the air around him, his rough sketches now refined by some of the greatest minds in the galaxy, mathematics that might change everything, or might be buried forever because people were afraid. He thought about going home, about giving up, about letting someone else deal with this problem. But then he remembered why he'd asked that question in the first place. Because something didn't make sense. Because problems deserved answers. Because that's what humans did. They didn't accept the impossible. They found ways around it. "I'll be ready," he told Ambassador Lee. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I'll be ready." The Science Council chamber was the most intimidating place Jiho had ever seen. It was enormous, circular, with seats rising up in tiers on all sides. Representatives from 47 different species sat waiting. Some looked curious. Many looked hostile. Jiho stood in the center, feeling very small and very human. Ambassador Lee sat in the visitors section with Dr. Minho Park, who had arrived from Earth just hours ago. Professor Talvin was supposed to be here too, but his seat was empty. Chancellor Vormis called the session to order. "We are here to evaluate the claims made by the human student Jiho regarding the null point paradox. This is an unusual situation. The council rarely convenes to hear from first-year students." "Then why are we here?" someone shouted from the upper tiers. Jiho couldn't see who. "Because preliminary analysis suggests his approach may have merit," Chancellor Vormis said carefully. "However unusual the circumstances." Counselor Threnvik stood. He was ancient, over 800 years old, his Valyrian body pale and translucent with age. When he spoke, everyone went quiet. "I studied under those who first documented the paradox," he said slowly. "I was young then, only 60 years old. I remember the excitement when the problem was discovered, and I remember the disappointment as decade after decade passed with no solution. Eventually, we decided it was unsolvable, a fundamental limit of our understanding." He paused, his ancient eyes fixed on Jiho. "Now this young human suggests we were wrong. Not in our mathematics, but in our assumptions. I want to hear what he has to say." Jiho took a deep breath. His hands were shaking. He activated his presentation, and the equations appeared in holographic form around him. "The null point paradox exists because of one basic assumption," Jiho began. His voice cracked slightly. "Everyone assumed that spacetime would resist faster than light travel, that it would fight back, that breaking the light barrier should tear ships apart. He manipulated the equations, highlighting the key sections. But what if spacetime doesn't resist? What if it accommodates? What if the universe has built-in mechanisms to prevent catastrophic failure?" "That's absurd," someone called out. "Spacetime isn't a living thing. It doesn't make choices." "No, but it has properties," Jiho said. He was getting into his rhythm now, forgetting his fear. "Back on Earth, we have materials that get stronger when stressed. We have systems with redundancy. We build things that can survive damage. What if the universe works the same way?" He pulled up new equations. the ones he'd developed with Professor Milkasa and Dr. Quenthar over the past 2 days. Space-time has elasticity. We know this. Einstein proved it centuries ago. But we always thought that elasticity had limits, that if you pushed too hard, space-time would break. What if it doesn't break because it can't break? What if it's designed to survive stress? Designed by whom? Another counselor demanded. Not designed, evolved, adapted, exists in a state that allows for extreme conditions without collapsing. Like how water can exist as ice, liquid, and vapor. Like how matter can survive inside black holes. The universe has resilience we never accounted for. Professor Milkasa stood in the faculty section. If I may speak? I verified the mathematics. If we accept that space-time has adaptive properties, the null-point paradox resolves. The equations balance. FTL travel works not despite the laws of physics, but because those laws are more sophisticated than we understood. This is Deathworlder thinking, someone shouted. Primitive anthropomorphization of physical laws. Perhaps, Dr. Quenthar said, standing as well. But primitive doesn't mean wrong. I spent 2 centuries studying the paradox. I never questioned the fundamental assumption because I never had reason to. I come from a peaceful world, a stable world. Where would I learn to think about systems that survive stress? She gestured at Jiho. He comes from a world where survival is constant, where systems must adapt or die, where nothing is stable. That perspective allowed him to see what we could not. The chamber erupted in argument. Some counselors were shouting support. Others were demanding the presentation be stopped. Chancellor Vormis struggled to restore order. A door opened and Professor Thalvin entered. He was moving slowly, supported by medical staff. His skin was pale and Jiho could see bandages wrapped around several tentacles. Professor, Jiho called out, you should be in medical suspension. I had to be here, Professor Thalvin said weakly. He made his way to his seat, waving off the medical staff's protests. To witness this, to vote, what happened to you? Counselor Threnvik asked. There was a second assassination attempt last night, Professor Thalvin said. Aimed at Jiho. I intercepted the weapon. Plasma bolt. Rather painful. The chamber went completely silent. Someone shot you? Jiho asked, horrified. Someone shot at you, Professor Thalvin corrected. I merely got in the way. The assailant has been captured. Another faculty member, I'm afraid. Professor Ventalis from the mathematics department. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Why would he do that? Chancellor Vormis demanded. Because he was afraid, Professor Thalvin said simply. Afraid of change. Afraid of being wrong. Afraid of what it means if a first-year human student can solve a problem that eluded our greatest minds. A human woman entered the chamber, showing security credentials. She was young, maybe 30, and moved with confident precision. I'm Detective Yuna Choi, Galactic Security Division, she announced. I've been investigating these assassination attempts. We've uncovered a conspiracy. Professor Ventalis didn't act alone. There are others, including a member of this council, who believed that suppressing the human solution was necessary to maintain galactic order. The chamber erupted again. Counselors were shouting, demanding to know who the conspirator was. Detective Yuna pointed to a counselor in the upper tier. Counselor Dreshevan, you funded both attempts. We have the transaction records. Security moved quickly. Counselor Dreshevan tried to run but was caught within seconds. As he was led away, he shouted, You're fools, all of you! Giving humans academic prestige will shift everything. They'll demand more. They'll change our society. That's the point, Ambassador Lee said, standing. She addressed the entire council, her voice carrying clearly. You invited humans to your university. You claim to value knowledge above all. But the moment a human shows you something you missed, you panic. The moment we challenge your assumptions, some of you try to kill us. She walked to stand beside Jiho. Perhaps the real paradox isn't in your equations. It's in your thinking. You claim to be advanced civilizations, but you're afraid of new ideas. You claim to value truth, but you want to suppress it when it's inconvenient. You claim to be peaceful, but you resort to violence when challenged. The chamber was silent now. Every eye was on Ambassador Lee. Earth isn't perfect, she continued. We're violent. We're aggressive. We come from a world that tried to kill us every day. But that taught us something valuable. It taught us to question everything. To never accept that something is impossible just because it's hard. To survive, we had to adapt, to change, to think differently. She gestured at the equation still floating around Jiho. That's what you see here, a different way of thinking. A Deathworlder's perspective. You can accept it and grow or reject it and stagnate, but you can't pretend it doesn't exist anymore. Counselor Threnvik rose slowly from his seat. At over 800 years old, he commanded respect simply by standing. I have a confession to make, he said. When I was young, when the paradox was first discovered, we did question the basic assumptions. We considered that space-time might be more flexible than we thought. But we abandoned that line of thinking. Why? Jiho asked. Because it frightened us. Because it suggested the universe was less orderly than we needed it to be. Because accepting uncertainty felt dangerous. So we convinced ourselves the problem was unsolvable. We made our fear into academic doctrine. The old counselor looked at Jiho with something like sadness. You haven't just solved a mathematical problem, young human. You've revealed our cowardice. We stopped questioning because questioning was uncomfortable. We accepted mystery because mystery was safer than truth. He turned to face the council. I move that we accept this solution and publish it immediately. That we acknowledge our errors and move forward with this new understanding. And I move that we formally apologize to Earth and to this student for the violence directed at him. Seconded, Professor Milkasa called out. Chancellor Vormis looked shaken. The motion requires a vote. All in favor of accepting the solution and publishing? Hands, tentacles, wings, and other appendages rose throughout the chamber. Jiho counted quickly. It looked close. All opposed? More appendages rose. The count was very close. The vote is tied, Chancellor Vormis announced. In the event of a tie, the deciding vote falls to the senior member of the physics faculty who is present. Professor Thalvin, you have the deciding vote. Everyone turned to look at the injured professor. His skin was very pale and he looked exhausted. But his voice was steady. For 400 years I have taught physics, he said. I have published papers. I have mentored students. I thought I understood the universe. Then a 20-year-old human asked me a simple question, and I realized how much I had stopped learning, how comfortable I had become with mystery. He paused, his skin shifting to a determined purple. I vote to publish, to accept this solution, to acknowledge that we were wrong, and that a Deathworlder showed us why. I vote for truth over comfort, for growth over stagnation. I vote for the future. The chamber remained silent for a long moment. Then Counselor Threnvik began to applaud. It was a human gesture adopted across the galaxy. Others joined in. Not everyone. Some counselors sat in angry silence. But enough applauded that the sound filled the enormous chamber. Jiho felt tears on his face and didn't care. He had done it. They had done it. The solution would be published. The null point paradox was solved. 3 weeks after the council vote, Jiho still couldn't quite believe it had happened. The solution had been published to the Galactic Academic Network. Within hours, research institutions across 47 worlds were analyzing it. Within days, engineers were running simulations, and within 2 weeks they had results. Jiho sat in Professor Thalvin's office, watching the data stream in. The professor had recovered from his injuries, though he moved more slowly now. His skin flashed colors Jiho had learned to read: excitement, satisfaction, and something that might have been pride. The Hive Queen's engineering division reports a 23% increase in FTL drive efficiency, Professor Thalvin read from his display. The Prism Collective has successfully tested a new drive design that was previously thought impossible. 6 other species have reported similar breakthroughs. All in 2 weeks? Jiho asked. Once you gave them the correct framework, progress was rapid. That's how science works. One insight can unlock dozens of applications. The professor's skin flashed warm blue. You've changed things, Jiho. Changed them fundamentally. There was a knock at the door. Dayon entered, her leaves bright green with happiness. Have you seen the news? She asked excitedly. Earth just received an official invitation to join the Galactic Science Consortium as a full member species. Not an observer. A full member. That hasn't happened in 200 years. Jiho felt a surge of emotion he couldn't quite name. Pride maybe, or relief. Earth was no longer the quarantined death world. Humans were no longer the dangerous primitives. They were colleagues, equals. There's more, Dayon continued. 50 human students have been accepted for next semester. 50. The university is expanding its xenology program to accommodate them. Professor Milkasa arrived next. her crystal body glowing softly. "The mathematics department wants to offer you a research position. Skip the rest of your undergraduate degree. Work directly with faculty." "I'm only 20, Jiho protested. "I barely understand basic quantum mechanics." "You understand how to question assumptions," Professor Milkasa said. "That's rarer and more valuable than technical knowledge. Technical knowledge can be learned. Original thinking is a gift." Ambassador Lee was the last to arrive. She looked tired but happy. "I've spent the past 3 weeks in diplomatic meetings," she said. 19 species have formally apologized for their initial reactions. 12 more have requested cultural exchange programs with Earth. And the Council has voted to lift all remaining restrictions on human participation in galactic society. "Because I solved a math problem?" Jiho asked. It still seemed surreal. "Because you proved that different perspectives have value," Ambassador Lee corrected. "You showed them that Deathworlder thinking isn't inferior, just different. That survival-focused problem-solving can complement their harmony-focused approach." She pulled up a holographic display showing Earth. "Your sister Hyun has been accepted to GCU for next year. Engineering program. She wants to study FTL drive design using your framework." Jiho smiled, his little sister following him to the stars. A year ago that would have been impossible. Now it was just the beginning. "There's something else," Professor Thalavin said. His skin shifted to serious purple. "The Council wants to formalize what you've started. They're calling it the Deathworlder Initiative, actively recruiting students from harsh, dangerous worlds. Not just Earth. There are other worlds in the galaxy that breed tough, adaptive thinkers. The Council believes their perspectives could lead to more breakthroughs." "Is that good?" Jiho asked. "It's necessary," Professor Milkasa said. "We've been stagnant, comfortable. You've shown us that comfort breeds complacency. We need challenge. We need different ways of thinking." Over the following months, Jiho watched the changes ripple outward. The first batch of new human students arrived, nervous and excited. Jiho helped orient them, showing them that it was okay to ask questions, to challenge assumptions, to think differently. Professor Thalvin became his doctoral advisor, formally inviting Jiho to skip most of his undergraduate work. They published 3 papers together, each one examining basic assumptions in physics that had gone unquestioned for centuries. Dr. Quinthar, who had been so skeptical initially, became one of Jiho's strongest supporters. She started teaching a course called Alternative Problem-Solving Methods, which became one of the most popular classes at the university. Dayun remained his closest friend. Together, they proved that peaceful, harmony-focused species and aggressive, survival-focused species could collaborate beautifully. Their joint research paper on quantum field theory won the Student Research Award, but the biggest change came 6 months after the council vote. Jiho was asked to give a guest lecture to the first-year advanced hyperphysics class, the same class where everything had started. As he stood at the front of the lecture hall, looking at the faces of students from 19 different species, he felt a strange sense of completion. "Today we're going to talk about assumptions," he began, "about how the things we take for granted can blind us to truth." He pulled up the null-point paradox equations. 6 months ago, I sat in the back of this room and asked a question that made everyone uncomfortable. I didn't know I was being revolutionary. I just thought something didn't make sense. The students listened intently. Among them were 3 other humans, no longer the only Deathworlders on campus. The lesson isn't that humans are smarter than other species. We're not. The lesson is that diversity matters. Different experiences create different ways of thinking. If everyone in a room has the same background, you'll miss things. You'll develop blind spots. He noticed a student in the 3rd row, a delicate quillwren with translucent wings, raising one of her arms hesitantly. "Yes?" Jiho asked. "Is it true you were almost killed for asking a question?" The room went quiet. Jiho had known this would come up eventually. "Yes. Twice." Some people were very afraid of change, afraid of having their certainties challenged. "Fear makes people do terrible things. Are you afraid now?" another student asked. A Valurian, young with chromatophores that flashed nervous yellow. "Sometimes," Jiho admitted. "Every time I question something established, part of me worries about the reaction. But I learned something important. The fear of being wrong shouldn't stop you from seeking truth. The worst thing you can do is stop asking questions because asking is uncomfortable." He pulled up a new equation on the display, one he'd been working on with Professor Thalvin. There's another paradox. Not as famous as the null point, but equally frustrating. The temporal drift problem. It's been unsolved for 300 years. Everyone assumes that time flows at a constant rate in the quantum realm. He paused, looking at the students. But what if that assumption is wrong? The same Quilrin student who had asked about the assassination attempt raised her arm again. What if quantum time is variable? What if it speeds up and slows down based on observation pressure? Jiho smiled. Show me your thinking. The student pulled out her data pad and started sketching. Other students leaned in to look. Soon half the class was contributing ideas, approaching the problem from different angles. Professor Talvin, watching from the doorway, allowed himself a rare smile. The Deathworlder hadn't just solved one problem. He'd taught the galaxy how to think differently. After class, Jiho walked across campus. It looked different now. More diverse. Humans walked alongside chlorophytes, Valurians, and dozens of other species. The barriers were coming down. The fear was fading. His communicator buzzed. A message from Hyun on Earth. I'm packing for GCU, can't believe I'm really doing this. Mom cried. Dad gave me a speech about representing humanity. No pressure, right? But seriously, thank you for opening the door. For showing them we belong here. Jiho typed back. You earned your place. Just remember to question everything. Even if it makes people uncomfortable? Especially if it makes people uncomfortable. That's when you know you're onto something. He stopped by the physics building looking up at the massive structure. In the courtyard, a new monument had been erected. It showed the original null-point paradox equation on one side, and Jiho's solution on the other. But it wasn't dedicated to him. The inscription read, To those brave enough to question, to those humble enough to learn, to the endless pursuit of truth. 5 years later, Jiho stood in the same lecture hall where everything had begun, but this time as an assistant professor. He was 25 now, the youngest faculty member in GCU history. His co-teacher was Daeun, who had also completed her doctorate early. They were teaching a course called Cross-Cultural Problem Solving. It was mandatory for all first-year students now. The class was diverse in ways that would have been impossible 6 years ago. 15 humans, 20 students from peaceful worlds, 8 from harsh, dangerous environments that made Earth look gentle. All of them learning from each other. Today's problem, Jiho announced, has been unsolved for 50 years. The cascade interference phenomenon. Everyone assumes that wave functions collapse instantaneously. But what if... A human student in the front row raised her hand. What if collapse has duration? What if it's a process, not an event? Jiho grinned. Interesting. Explore that. An ancient Valurian student, over 200 years old and returning to university after a long career, raised a tentacle. What if we're thinking about collapse wrong entirely? What if it's not the wave function changing, but our perception? Also interesting. Compare those approaches. Daeun pulled up a simulation environment. Students from different species, different backgrounds, different ways of thinking, all collaborated on the problem. Within 30 minutes, they had 3 promising angles of attack. None of them would have been found by a homogeneous group. That evening, Jiho received a message from Professor Talvin, who had retired the year before. I heard your class found promising leads on the cascade problem. In a single session, it took me 40 years to get that far. You're not just teaching students, Jiho. You're teaching the galaxy to evolve. I'm proud of you. Jiho looked out his office window at the campus below. Students from across the galaxy, learning together, questioning together, growing together. He thought about that first day in advanced hyperphysics. How terrified he had been. How alone he had felt. How simple his question had seemed. What if the math is correct but the assumptions are wrong? Such a simple question, but it had changed everything. Not because the answer solved one problem, but because it taught the galaxy something more important. That the greatest discoveries come not from having all the answers, but from having the courage to ask the right questions. And sometimes the most valuable perspective comes from those who learn to survive the impossible. Jiho pulled up his notes for tomorrow's lecture. Another unsolved problem. Another chance to show students that impossible just means no one's found the right question yet. He smiled and got to work. The Deathworlder's legacy wasn't a solution. It was a mindset, and that mindset was spreading across the galaxy, one question at a time.